There is something you do every morning that betrays everything you claim to believe about your destiny. You wake up, and within the first few moments of consciousness, you begin negotiating with doubt. You check your circumstances before you check your faith. You measure your possibilities by yesterday's limitations, and you call this wisdom. But deep in your spirit, there lives a different person entirely. Someone who knows they were born for extraordinary things. Someone who remembers, even if only in flashes, what it feels like to be truly blessed. This version of you doesn't beg the universe for permission. This version doesn't wait for proof before believing. Today, I want to show you how to stop living as a spiritual beggar and start walking as heaven's heir. This isn't about positive thinking or empty affirmations. This is about a fundamental shift in your identity that changes not just how you feel, but how reality itself responds to you. You see, there exists a secret that the truly blessed have always known. They live as if God has already granted his favor, not because they are naive, but because they understand something most people never discover. Faith doesn't follow evidence. Faith creates it. When you align your mental attitude with divine blessing before you see any proof, you activate forces that most people never access. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become their author. But this requires you to abandon the false security of so-called realism and step into a realm where your inner conviction becomes more real than your outer conditions. What I'm about to share with you isn't theory. It's a practical system for living that transforms hesitation into certainty, lack into abundance, and fear into unshakable confidence. But you must be willing to walk by faith when the world walks by sight. You must be willing to declare victory before the battle is won. If you're ready to stop negotiating with doubt and start living as the blessed person you were created to be, then stay with me. And if this message stirs something deep within you, subscribe now, because what we're building together is a community of people who refuse to settle for anything less than their divine inheritance. Number 1, the anticipated mental attitude, the invisible key to power. There is a moment every morning when you stand at the crossroads between faith and fear, between walking as blessed or crawling as broken. Most people choose without even realizing they are choosing. They wake up and immediately begin measuring their possibilities by their problems. They check their bank account before they check their beliefs. They consult their circumstances before they consult their conviction. But what if I told you that this single moment, this split-second decision about how you will carry yourself today, determines whether you access the invisible forces that shape reality or remain locked out of them forever? The anticipated mental attitude is not positive thinking dressed up in spiritual language. It is the recognition that faith operates on a frequency that precedes evidence. True faith doesn't wait for proof. It creates it. When you choose to walk today as if God has already granted his blessing, you align yourself with laws that most people never discover because they spend their entire lives waiting for permission to believe. Picture two men standing before the same locked door. One sees an obstacle, the other sees a test of his conviction. One waits for someone else to find the key, the other becomes the key. The difference between them is not talent, not opportunity, not even circumstances. The difference is the mental attitude they bring to this moment. The man who walks with anticipated blessing carries himself differently. He speaks differently. He makes decisions differently. Not because he is delusional, but because he understands something profound about how reality works. He knows that the invisible world is more real than the visible one, and that faith is not hoping for something to happen. It is knowing it already has. I once knew a man who lost everything in a single day. His business collapsed. His family turned against him, his health failed. By every external measure, he was finished. But instead of shrinking into defeat, he made a decision that changed everything. He decided to walk as if God was about to turn his greatest loss into his greatest victory. Not someday, today, right now. Every morning he would rise and conduct himself as a man whose breakthrough was already in motion. He didn't pretend his problems didn't exist. He simply refused to let them define his spiritual posture. Within 18 months, he had rebuilt everything he lost and more. But the real miracle wasn't his external restoration. It was the transformation of his inner world from victim to victor. This is what I mean by anticipated mental attitude. It is living today as if the miracle you need has already happened. It is conducting yourself as someone whose prayers have already been answered. It is walking with the certainty that what God has promised, God has already provided, even when your physical eyes cannot yet see it. Your mind is the invisible key to power because it determines which frequency you broadcast into the universe. Fear broadcasts one signal, faith broadcasts another, and the universe responds accordingly. When you choose to align your thoughts, your words, your actions with divine blessing before you see any evidence of it, you activate forces that have been waiting for your permission to work on your behalf. But here is what most people miss. This alignment must be total. You cannot walk in faith on Sunday and doubt on Monday. You cannot declare blessing in your prayers and limitation in your conversations. Your entire mental attitude must shift from hoping God will bless you to knowing He already has. This requires a daily decision, moment by moment, to see yourself as already favored, already provided for, already positioned for victory. Not because you deserve it, but because faith is the evidence of things not seen. And when you live from this evidence instead of waiting for it, you become a magnet for the very things you have been praying for. The invisible key to power is not hidden in some distant spiritual realm. It is in your mind, in this moment, waiting for you to turn it. The question is not whether God is ready to bless you. The question is whether you are ready to walk as already blessed. Because when you do, when you carry yourself as someone whose victory is already written, whose provision is already secured, whose breakthrough is already in motion, the entire universe has no choice but to rearrange itself to match your conviction. Number 2, doubt disguised as realism, the hidden enemy. You have been taught to call it wisdom. You have been conditioned to believe it protects you. You wear it like armor and call it maturity. But what you have learned to call realism is nothing more than fear dressed up in rational clothing, and it has become the most sophisticated enemy of your destiny. Listen carefully to the voice in your head when opportunity presents itself. Notice how quickly it begins calculating all the reasons why something cannot work. Watch how it surveys your past failures and projects them onto your future possibilities. Observe how it whispers that dreaming too big is dangerous, that faith without guarantees is foolish, that hoping for more than you currently have is setting yourself up for disappointment. This voice calls itself your protector. It claims to be keeping you safe from delusion and failure. But what it is really doing is keeping you imprisoned in a cage of your own making, and the bars of that cage are forged from doubt disguised as wisdom. True realism would acknowledge that everything around you was once impossible. The device you are listening to this on, the building you are sitting in, the very civilization that surrounds you, all of it began as an impossible dream in someone's mind. True realism would recognize that the greatest achievements in human history were accomplished by people who refused to let current circumstances define future possibilities. But what we have been taught to call realism is actually negative faith. It is the absolute conviction that the worst will happen, that dreams don't come true, that people like us don't get to live extraordinary lives. It is faith in limitation, belief in lack, certainty in defeat, and it is one of the most destructive forces on earth because it masquerades as intelligence. Think of how many dreams have died, not from lack of resources, not from external opposition, but from this internal saboteur whispering that being practical means settling for less. Think of how many divine opportunities have been rejected not because they were genuinely wrong, but because they required a level of faith that felt dangerous to someone addicted to false security. I want you to see this enemy clearly because it will never announce itself as doubt. It will always come dressed as concern for your well-being, as protection from disappointment, as mature responsibility. It will use the language of care while it systematically destroys your capacity to believe in anything greater than your current circumstances. There was a woman who dreamed of starting a school for underprivileged children. She had no money, no building, no staff, no official training in education. When she shared her vision, everyone around her offered the same advice. Be realistic. Start smaller. Get more experience first. Wait until you have more resources. They called it wisdom, but what they were really offering was a death sentence for her dream. But something inside her refused to accept their version of realism. She chose to believe that if God had planted this vision in her heart, He had already made provision for its fulfillment. She started with 5 children in her living room. Today, 30 years later, that school has educated thousands of children and changed an entire community. What would have happened if she had listened to realistic advice? Here's what you must understand. Every time you choose so-called realism over faith, you are not protecting yourself from disappointment. You are guaranteeing it. Because a life lived in constant negotiation with doubt is already a defeated life. You become so focused on avoiding failure that you never allow yourself to succeed. The shift from protective realism to militant faith requires courage, but it also requires clarity about what realism actually is. True realism recognizes that we live in a universe governed by laws we are only beginning to understand. True realism acknowledges that consciousness shapes reality in ways that defy conventional logic. True realism admits that faith has produced measurable, repeatable results throughout human history. False realism, the kind that masquerades as wisdom, is nothing more than educated fear. It takes past limitations and makes them permanent. It takes temporary circumstances and makes them eternal. It takes human opinions and makes them divine verdicts. When you catch this voice whispering its false concerns, you must challenge it directly. Ask it to show you one significant achievement in human history that was accomplished by people who prioritized safety over vision. Ask it to name one breakthrough that came from accepting current limitations as permanent. Ask it to justify why your dreams should be sacrificed on the altar of other people's fears. Because here is the truth that fear disguised as realism does not want you to discover. Faith is not the enemy of intelligence. It is intelligence applied to invisible realities. It is the wisdom to recognize that what you can see is only a fraction of what is actually there. Replace protective realism with active, militant faith. Not blind faith, but intelligent faith that recognizes the difference between temporary circumstances and eternal possibilities. Faith that understands the universe is on the side of those who dare to believe in something greater than what they can currently see. Your greatest enemy is not lack of resources or opportunity. Your greatest enemy is doubt wearing the mask of wisdom, convincing you to call surrender practical and limitation sensible. Unmask this enemy and watch how quickly your world begins to change. Number 3, the spiritual rehearsal. How to embody the blessing before seeing it. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. This is not metaphysical theory. This is scientific fact. When you mentally rehearse an event with enough emotional intensity, your nervous system responds as if it has already happened. Your body releases the same chemicals, your mind forms the same neural pathways, your spirit aligns with the same frequency. But most people use this incredible power in reverse. They rehearse failure. They mentally practice defeat. They imagine conversations going wrong, plans falling apart, dreams being crushed. They become masters at emotional preparation for disaster and then wonder why their lives seem to attract exactly what they have been rehearsing. What I am about to share with you will revolutionize how you prepare for your future. Instead of rehearsing failure, you are going to learn to rehearse victory. Instead of practicing defeat, you are going to practice blessing. Instead of imagining problems, you are going to imagine solutions already in motion. This is not daydreaming. This is not fantasy. This is spiritual rehearsal, and it is one of the most powerful tools for transforming the invisible into the visible that has ever been discovered. Picture yourself 6 months from now, living in the reality you have been praying for, not hoping for it, not working toward it, but living in it. See yourself conducting business from a position of abundance rather than desperation. Watch yourself making decisions from confidence rather than fear. Observe yourself walking into rooms as someone whose breakthrough has already happened. Feel the weight of victory in your chest. Feel the lightness of burden lifted from your shoulders. Feel the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your prayers have been answered. This is not imagination for its own sake. This is training your entire being to operate from the frequency of blessing rather than the frequency of lack. Your body is an incredible instrument that responds to the dominant signal you send it. When you rehearse blessing with enough intensity and consistency, your nervous system begins to align with that reality. Your posture changes, your voice changes, your decision-making changes. You begin to carry yourself as someone whose victory is already secured. But here is where most people fail. They engage in this spiritual rehearsal once or twice and expect immediate transformation. They visualize success for 10 minutes and then spend the rest of the day speaking from defeat. They mentally rehearse blessing in the morning and doubt in the afternoon. Spiritual rehearsal must become a daily discipline, practiced with the same intensity an athlete prepares for competition. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you review your problems, before you calculate your limitations, you must spend time living in the reality you intend to create. There was a young man who dreamed of becoming a successful entrepreneur, but had failed in 3 previous attempts. His confidence was shattered, his resources were depleted, his reputation was damaged. Everything in his external world screamed failure. But instead of accepting this verdict, he chose to begin each day with spiritual rehearsal. For 30 minutes every morning, he would sit quietly and live in the reality of his successful business. He would feel the satisfaction of serving customers who valued his work. He would experience the joy of providing for his family from the fruit of his vision. He would mentally walk through his day as a successful man, making decisions from abundance rather than desperation. At first, this felt like self-deception. His circumstances had not changed. His bank account was still empty. His previous failures were still real, but something profound was happening in his inner world. His nervous system was being retrained to operate from success rather than failure. His mind was forming new neural pathways aligned with victory rather than defeat. Within 18 months, he had built the most successful business of his career. But the real transformation was not external. It was the shift from someone who rehearsed failure to someone who rehearsed blessing. His entire identity had changed before his circumstances caught up. This is the power of spiritual rehearsal. You are not just imagining a better future. You are becoming the person who lives in that future. You are training your mind, your emotions, your body, your spirit to operate from the reality you intend to experience rather than the reality you currently see. But spiritual rehearsal requires more than mental visualization. It requires emotional embodiment. You must feel the blessing as if it has already happened. You must experience the gratitude as if the prayer has already been answered. You must live in the joy as if the breakthrough has already occurred. When you do this consistently, something remarkable happens. Your entire energy field begins to shift. You start attracting people, opportunities, and resources that are aligned with the reality you have been rehearsing. What seemed impossible begins to feel inevitable. What felt distant begins to feel within reach. The blessing you seek is not just waiting for you in some future moment. It is waiting for you to become the person who can receive it. And the fastest way to become that person is to rehearse being that person until the rehearsal becomes your reality. Stop rehearsing defeat and start rehearsing victory. Stop practicing fear and start practicing faith. Stop imagining problems and start imagining solutions. Your future is listening to what you rehearse today. Number 4, the silence of the blessing when God tests your walk. There comes a moment in every person's journey of faith when heaven goes silent. Your prayers seem to hit a ceiling and fall back down. Your circumstances don't improve despite your believing. Your breakthroughs feel more distant than ever, and the voice that once whispered encouragement has gone quiet. This is the moment when most people quit. This is when they decide that faith doesn't work, that God has forgotten them, that their dreams were nothing more than delusions. They interpret silence as rejection, delay as denial, and the absence of immediate answers as proof that they were wrong to believe in the first place. But what if I told you that this silence is not abandonment? What if this quiet season is not punishment but promotion? What if God's silence is actually the most sacred space where your true character is revealed and your deepest convictions are tested? The silence of the blessing is not God withholding from you. It is God observing you. He is watching to see whether your faith depends on His voice or on His nature. He is testing whether you walk by feelings or by faith, whether your conviction is conditional or absolute. Think of it like this. Anyone can believe when they feel God's presence. Anyone can have faith when they hear his voice clearly. Anyone can trust when circumstances are moving in their favor. But the person who continues to walk as blessed when everything is silent, when nothing seems to be happening, when all external evidence suggests their faith is misplaced, that person is operating from a realm that most people never discover. The silence is not empty space between prayers and answers. The silence is sacred space where your identity is either established or shattered. It is where you discover whether you believe in blessing because you feel it or because you know it. It is where you learn the difference between faith that depends on circumstances and faith that creates circumstances. I have walked through seasons of silence that felt like death. Periods where every prayer seemed to echo back unanswered, where every door I approached remained locked, where every step forward felt like stepping into emptiness. During these times, everything in me screamed to quit believing, to stop hoping, to accept that I had been deceived about my destiny. But in the deepest part of that silence, I heard something that changed everything. Not a voice from heaven, but a voice from within. It whispered that God's silence was not his absence, but his confidence in me. He was quiet because he knew I was strong enough to keep walking without constant reassurance. He was silent because he was watching me discover the depth of my own conviction. There was a woman who prayed for 5 years for her marriage to be restored. Her husband had left, the divorce papers were signed, and everyone told her to move on. But something in her spirit refused to accept that verdict. She continued to pray, to believe, to conduct herself as a woman whose marriage was being restored, even though nothing in her circumstances suggested this was possible. For 5 years, heaven was silent. No dramatic signs, no prophetic words, no sudden changes in her situation, just silence. And in that silence, she was forced to discover whether her faith was based on feelings or on something deeper. She learned to walk by conviction rather than confirmation, by truth rather than temporary evidence. In the 6th year, her husband returned, not because of anything she did to manipulate the situation, but because her unwavering faith had created an invisible reality that eventually became visible. Her commitment to walking as a blessed woman during the silent season had prepared her to receive the blessing when it manifested. The silence teaches you things that the voice never could. It teaches you that your faith is not dependent on external validation. It teaches you that blessing is not always loud and obvious. It teaches you that God's timing is not delayed blessing, but perfect preparation. During the silent seasons, you must learn to interpret God's quiet as confidence, not rejection. His delay as development, not denial. His seeming absence as an invitation to discover the God who lives within you rather than the God who speaks from outside you. The silence is where boys become men and girls become women. It is where believers become warriors and dreamers become visionaries. It is where you stop needing constant reassurance and start living from unshakable conviction. When you find yourself in a season of silence, do not abandon your walk. Intensify it. Do not question your blessing. Declare it more boldly. Do not shrink back from faith. Advance in it with greater determination, because the silence is not the end of your story. It is the testing ground where your story gains the weight of authenticity. God is not silent because he has forgotten you. He is silent because he is watching you become the person who can handle the blessing he is preparing to release. He is quiet because he knows that what he is building in you during this season is more valuable than what you think you are waiting for. The blessing is not released to those who need constant encouragement. It is released to those who keep walking as blessed, even when heaven is quiet, even when nothing seems to be moving, even when faith feels like the most unreasonable thing in the world. Walk through the silence as someone who knows that God's silence is not his absence, but his confidence, and watch what happens when he finally speaks again. Number 5, prophetic identity, the person who walks with the blessing. How you see yourself determines everything. Not how others see you, not how circumstances define you, not how your past labels you, but how you see yourself in the depths of your spirit. This internal vision becomes the blueprint from which your external reality is constructed. Most people live as spiritual beggars. They approach life with their hands outstretched, hoping someone will drop a few coins of opportunity into their palms. They wait for permission to dream, for approval to succeed, for others to recognize their worth before they recognize it themselves. They spend their entire lives pleading for what they should be claiming as their inheritance. But there is another way to walk through this world. There is another identity available to you. It is the identity of a spiritual heir, someone who belongs to the promise not because they earned it, but because they were born into it. Someone who approaches opportunities not as a beggar hoping for scraps, but as royalty claiming their rightful inheritance. This is prophetic identity. It is seeing yourself as God sees you before circumstances catch up to reflect that vision. It is walking with the dignity of someone who knows their destiny is secure, even when their current situation suggests otherwise. It is conducting yourself as blessed before the blessing becomes visible to others. The difference between an heir and a beggar is not their circumstances, it is their posture. A beggar asks for permission. An heir takes position. A beggar hopes for a handout. An heir expects inheritance. A beggar apologizes for their dreams. An heir declares them with authority. Watch how you enter a room. Listen to how you speak about your future. Notice how you respond to opportunity. Observe how you handle setbacks. These behaviors reveal your true identity, the one operating beneath your conscious awareness. If you find yourself shrinking, apologizing, or waiting for others to validate your worth, you are operating from beggar consciousness. But prophetic identity is available to you right now. It is not something you earn through achievement. It is something you claim through revelation. The moment you understand that you were created for blessing, born for purpose, destined for significance, your entire approach to life changes. I want you to imagine two people applying for the same position. Both have identical qualifications, identical experience, identical backgrounds. But one walks into the interview as someone hoping to be chosen, while the other walks in as someone who knows they belong. One speaks from desperation, the other from destiny. One begs for the opportunity. The other presents themselves as the solution the company has been looking for. Which one do you think gets the position? Not based on qualifications, but based on the energy they bring into the room. The person operating from heir consciousness carries themselves with a quiet confidence that others can feel. They speak with authority because they know their worth is not determined by this one opportunity. Prophetic identity is forged through daily decisions about how you will see yourself. Every morning you choose between victim and victor, between limited and limitless, between beggar and heir. These choices, repeated over time, become your dominant self-concept, and your dominant self-concept becomes your lived reality. There was a young man born into poverty who decided at age 16 that his circumstances would not define his destiny. While his friends accepted their limitations as permanent, he began to see himself differently. Not as someone trapped by lack, but as someone temporarily housed in conditions that did not match his true identity. He began to walk differently, speak differently, dream differently, not because his bank account had changed, but because his identity had shifted. He started reading books about success, surrounding himself with people who thought bigger, and most importantly, conducting himself as someone whose breakthrough was inevitable rather than impossible. By age 30, he had built a business empire that employed hundreds of people from his old neighborhood. But the real transformation was not financial. It was the shift from someone who saw himself as a victim of circumstances to someone who saw himself as a creator of circumstances. Prophetic identity requires you to resist the gravitational pull of your current situation. It demands that you refuse to let temporary conditions define your permanent identity. It insists that you see yourself through the lens of your destiny rather than the mirror of your circumstances. This identity is not built through positive thinking or mental affirmations. It is built through repeated acts of faith that align your behavior with your true identity. Every time you choose to speak from victory rather than defeat, you strengthen heir consciousness. Every time you make decisions from abundance rather than scarcity, you reinforce prophetic identity. But here is what you must understand. This identity will be tested. People will try to remind you of your past failures. Circumstances will attempt to convince you that you are not who you think you are. Your own mind will sometimes whisper that you are being unrealistic about your worth and potential. In these moments, you must remember that prophetic identity is not based on current evidence, it is based on eternal truth. You are not an accident hoping to become significant. You are significance temporarily disguised as ordinary. You are not a beggar hoping for blessing, you are blessing looking for expression. The world needs you to walk in prophetic identity because it needs what you carry. It needs your unique gifts, your specific solutions, your particular vision. But it will never receive these gifts if you continue to operate from beggar consciousness, waiting for permission to be who you were created to be. Stop asking for what belongs to you. Stop hoping for what is already yours. Stop begging for what you should be claiming. Embrace your prophetic identity as someone who belongs to the blessing, and watch how quickly the world begins to treat you as blessed. Because when you truly know who you are, everyone else knows it too. Number 6, the daily blessing habit, a ritual of spiritual command. What you declare every day with emotional intensity becomes the operating system of your life. Your brain takes these repeated declarations as instructions and begins to organize your perceptions, decisions, and actions around them. This is not mystical theory. This is how human consciousness works. But most people use this incredible power to program limitation into their lives. They wake up and immediately begin declaring their problems. They rehearse their frustrations, their fears, their inadequacies. They speak about what is wrong, what is missing, what is impossible, and their brain, being the faithful servant it is, begins looking for evidence to support these daily declarations. What if you reversed this process? What if instead of waking up and declaring your problems, you woke up and declared your blessing? What if the first words out of your mouth every morning were not complaints about your circumstances, but commands to your consciousness? This is the daily blessing habit, and it is one of the most powerful practices for reprogramming your mind and reshaping your reality. It is the discipline of speaking to your day before your day speaks to you. It is taking control of the conversation in your head before that conversation takes control of you. The words you speak first thing in the morning set the frequency for your entire day. When you declare, "Today I walk with the blessing that is already mine," you are not just making a statement, you are giving your nervous system a directive. You are instructing your brain to look for evidence of blessing rather than evidence of lack. But this must be more than casual positive thinking. It must be a declaration made with the authority of someone who knows they belong to the promise. It must be spoken with the conviction of someone whose identity is not determined by circumstances but by divine design. Your brain is incredibly responsive to emotionally charged repetition. When you consistently declare blessing with genuine feeling, you create new neural pathways that become the default channels through which you process reality. You literally rewire your consciousness to operate from expectation rather than desperation. The power of this practice lies not in the words themselves, but in the identity from which they are spoken. When you declare, "I am blessed," you must speak as someone who truly believes it. When you say, "Today brings breakthrough," you must feel the reality of that breakthrough in your chest. When you affirm, "Favor surrounds me," you must walk in the confidence of someone who knows they are divinely protected. There was a woman who struggled with chronic anxiety and depression for most of her adult life. Every morning she would wake up with a heaviness that seemed to color everything she touched. Her first thoughts were always about what could go wrong, what problems awaited her, what fears she would need to manage throughout the day. Then she discovered the power of the daily blessing habit. Instead of allowing her mind to run its automatic programs of worry and limitation, she began each day with deliberate declarations of blessing. "Today I walk in peace that passes understanding. Today I am surrounded by favor and opportunity. Today my path is illuminated with divine guidance." At first, these words felt hollow, almost dishonest, given her circumstances. But she continued the practice with determination, speaking these declarations even when she didn't feel them, especially when she didn't feel them. Within weeks, something profound began to shift. The anxiety that had been her constant companion began to loosen its grip. The depression that had defined her mornings began to lift. But the real transformation was deeper than emotional relief. Her entire approach to daily challenges changed. Instead of immediately assuming the worst would happen, she began to expect breakthrough. Instead of preparing for problems, she began to position herself for possibility. Her brain had been retrained to look for blessing instead of burden. The daily blessing habit works because it aligns your inner conversation with your true identity. Instead of speaking from your circumstances, you begin speaking to your circumstances. Instead of letting your situation define your expectations, you let your declarations define your experience. Here is how to implement this practice. Every morning, before you check your phone, before you review your to-do list, before you engage with any external input, spend 5 minutes declaring blessing over your day. Speak these words out loud, with emotion, with conviction. Today I walk with the blessing that is already mine. Today favor goes before me and prepares my path. Today I am guided by wisdom and surrounded by opportunity. Today breakthrough is not just possible but inevitable. Today I operate from abundance, not scarcity. Today I am a blessing to everyone I encounter. Adapt these declarations to your specific situation, but make sure they align with blessing rather than burden, with possibility rather than limitation, with faith rather than fear. The key is consistency and emotional intensity. Your brain responds to repetition, but it responds even more powerfully to repetition charged with genuine feeling. As you continue this practice, you will notice something remarkable happening. Your perception begins to shift. You start noticing opportunities you previously missed. You begin attracting people and situations that align with your declarations. What seemed impossible begins to feel inevitable. This is not self-deception, this is self-direction. You are not denying reality, you are creating it. You are taking responsibility for the conversation in your head instead of being a victim of whatever thoughts happen to show up. The daily blessing habit reshapes your brain, awakens dormant perceptions, and expands your capacity for clarity, courage, and spiritual sensitivity. It transforms you from someone who reacts to life into someone who creates life. It shifts you from passenger to driver in your own destiny. Start tomorrow morning. Before you do anything else, declare blessing over your day. Speak it with authority, feel it with conviction, and watch how quickly your world begins to rearrange itself around your words. Because what you declare daily with emotional intensity becomes what you experience inevitably with divine certainty. Number 7, when the world yields, the collapse of the invisible into the visible. There comes a moment when the invisible can no longer remain invisible. When faith sustained long enough, identity maintained consistently enough, and action aligned persistently enough, create a spiritual pressure that reality cannot withstand. This is when the world yields. This is when what was promised becomes what is experienced. Most people quit just before this moment. They walk 99% of the journey and turn back one step before breakthrough. They maintain faith for months, even years, but abandon it just before the invisible collapses into the visible. They give up on their blessing just before their blessing arrives. But those who understand the laws of spiritual manifestation know that the moment of greatest resistance often signals that breakthrough is imminent. They know that when circumstances seem to push back hardest against their faith, it usually means their faith is about to prevail. They recognize that the world yields not to casual hope, but to sustained conviction. The yielding happens when your internal reality becomes so established, so unshakable, so dominant that external reality has no choice but to conform to it. When you have walked so consistently in blessing that blessing becomes your natural frequency. When you have declared victory so persistently that defeat can no longer find a place in your consciousness. This is not about time. Some people experience the yielding in days, others in decades. This is about alignment. When your thoughts, your words, your emotions, your actions, and your identity are all broadcasting the same signal of blessing, the universe has no conflicting information about what to deliver to you. Picture a tuning fork struck with enough force. The vibration it creates will cause other tuning forks of the same frequency to vibrate in harmony, even across a room. This is sympathetic resonance, and it is exactly how the world responds to sustained spiritual alignment. When you vibrate consistently at the frequency of blessing, you cause everything in your environment that matches that frequency to begin vibrating with you. But here is what separates those who experience the yielding from those who don't. Those who see the invisible become visible, refuse to live as defeated, no matter what their circumstances suggest. They understand that the yielding is not a reward for effort, but a natural outcome of sustained frequency. I have watched this happen countless times. People who maintained faith when faith seemed foolish, who continued to walk in blessing when blessing seemed absent, who refused to change their spiritual posture even when their external circumstances demanded it. And then, often, suddenly, everything shifted. There was a man who worked for 15 years to build a business that would provide for his family and serve his community. Year after year, he faced obstacles that would have stopped most people. Financial setbacks, competitor attacks, economic downturns, personal health challenges. Each crisis was an invitation to quit, to settle for something smaller, to accept that his vision was too big for his reality. But he had learned the secret of sustained alignment. Even when his bank account said he was failing, he spoke success. Even when his competitors seemed to be winning, he walked in favor. Even when his health was threatened, he declared strength. His internal reality remained unshakable regardless of external circumstances. In the 16th year, everything changed. Not gradually, but suddenly. Opportunities that had been closed for years suddenly opened. Partnerships that had seemed impossible suddenly materialized. Resources that had been unavailable suddenly became abundant. It was as if the entire universe had been reorganizing itself behind the scenes to match his sustained conviction. This is how the yielding works. The world cannot withstand the pressure of faith that refuses to break. Reality cannot maintain a vibration that conflicts with a consciousness that has become unshakably aligned with blessing. The invisible has no choice but to become visible when someone walks consistently in the certainty of its existence. But the yielding requires something from you that most people are unwilling to give. It requires that you continue to act blessed when you feel cursed. It requires that you keep speaking victory when everything around you whispers defeat. It requires that you maintain your spiritual posture even when that posture seems to contradict everything your physical senses are telling you. The world yields to spiritual dominance, not spiritual desperation. It responds to those who take authority over their circumstances rather than those who are victims of their circumstances. It aligns with those who refuse to negotiate with doubt, who decline to entertain limitation, who reject any identity smaller than the one God has assigned them. When you maintain this level of spiritual consistency, something profound happens in the unseen realm. Forces that have been working against you begin working for you. Doors that have been locked begin to open. People who have been obstacles become bridges. Circumstances that have been hindrances become helpers. The blessing you have been believing for is not just waiting for the right time, it is waiting for the right frequency. It is waiting for you to become so aligned with its reality that your very presence in a room changes the atmosphere. It is waiting for you to walk with such confidence in its existence that others begin to believe in it too. But here is the most important thing to understand about the yielding. When it happens, when the invisible finally collapses into the visible, when your blessing becomes undeniable reality, you will discover that you have become something more than just blessed. You will have become a blessing. The person who walks consistently in faith becomes a source of hope for others. The person who maintains blessing consciousness becomes a catalyst for breakthrough in their environment. The person who refuses to be defeated becomes a living proof that defeat is not permanent. This is the ultimate purpose of the yielding, not just to receive blessing, but to become blessing, not just to experience favor, but to extend favor, not just to walk in victory, but to help others discover that victory is available to them too. The world yields to those who refuse to yield to the world. Stand firm in your blessing. Maintain your faith frequency. Keep walking as favored even when favor seems absent. Because when the invisible finally becomes visible, you will understand that the greatest miracle was not what happened around you, but what happened within you. And that transformation will bless the world for generations to come. You stand now at a place most people never reach. Not because you have arrived at some final destination, but because you have discovered something far more valuable. You have learned that the journey itself is the destination when you walk as blessed. Every step you take from this moment forward carries a different weight, not the weight of someone trying to become worthy of blessing, but the weight of someone who knows they already belong to it. This is not the end of learning. This is the beginning of living what you have learned. The person you were when you first heard these words is not the person listening now. Something has shifted in the deepest part of your consciousness. You cannot unknow what you now know about the power of walking in anticipated blessing. You cannot unfeel what you have felt about your true identity as heaven's heir. But knowledge becomes power only through practice. Understanding transforms into reality only through application. The principles you have discovered here must now be lived, breathed, and embodied in every ordinary moment of your extraordinary life. Think of a river that has finally reached the ocean. The river does not stop being a river when it touches that vast body of water. Instead, it becomes part of something infinitely larger while maintaining its essential nature. You are that river now, flowing into the ocean of divine possibility, carrying everything you have learned into waters without limits. Your blessing is no longer something you hope for. It is something you carry. Your favor is no longer something you seek. It is something you embody. Your victory is no longer something you work toward. It is something you walk in. The world around you is about to discover what happens when someone truly understands their identity as blessed. They will see it in how you make decisions, how you handle challenges, how you treat setbacks as setups for comebacks. They will feel it in your presence before you speak a word. If you are ready to continue this transformation, to deepen this walk, to expand this understanding, then walk with me further into these truths. Subscribe to this journey of becoming who you were always meant to be. Because when you walk as if God has already given you His blessing, you discover that you were never walking alone, you were walking home.